Good evening. I hope everyone's doing awesome. Getting myself organized here for our session this evening. It's cold as crap outside. We can talk about how much I hate this time of year, and I really wish I just find something else to do outside that isn't freezing. But anyway, if you didn't know, this evening we're going to be doing a little bit of a educational programming kind of thing. So we've got a lot of students right now who are getting ready to complete the Microsoft certification exams for either C#.net or SQL. And so almost every semester, either I or one of the other faculty put together some kind of study session, and it seems like when I do these on campus, it's always going to be bad for someone, and it's a huge undertaking for me to capture it correctly or get it recorded, and then if I can't get it recorded, then someone misses out. So I figured I would take this opportunity to try out what this is like on Twitch. Since if you're not already following my channel, I already do a little bit of programming here on a regular basis, as well as some video game related content that is not educational, unless you just like hanging out with me, and then that's probably educational. So to get us started this evening, we're going to be looking at these are the Microsoft Technology Associate exams, and you can use the !doc, D-O-C, command in the chat to get access to the 2 Google Docs that I'll be using tonight, so that you can have the questions and you can download your own copies, and that has links to all of the things that I'm going to show you. So the exam that we're looking at is 98-361 Software Development Fundamentals. And if you go out to Microsoft's website, then this is the information that you get on this particular exam. So of course, you don't pay this, but that's what it usually costs to take the exam. And then it talks about what the exam is going to cover. And so this particular exam, and I'm going to start with the C# exam because it's probably the harder of the two when it comes to C# or SQL. It's difficult because it covers not only our core programming, which if we drill into this, we can see, basic data storage type, numeric data, structures like if, else, switch, flowcharts, decision tables, those kinds of things. And then loops, so different types of for loops, while loops, do loops. All right, so all of this like basic programming stuff that you probably picked up in your first kind of programming class. Then it gets into the object-oriented stuff. So how to make a class, properties, methods, events, constructors. Inheritance, which we don't get to until we get to the second C# class. Polymorphism, which we may not still understand. And encapsulation. So there's a whole section in here on object-oriented programming. General software development, stuff like lifecycle management, testing. Some of that, we hit a little bit. Some you really need to get out of the study guide. And then algorithms and data structures, arrays, stacks, queues, linked lists. Unless you've taken data structures, you may never have really heard about some of these things. Moving on to web applications. This is where it gets really sketchy. So you've probably taken a web development class. You've taken, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, something like that. Page lifecycle, event model, and some ASP.NET, probably not, unless you've taken like an advanced web dev class. Understanding web hosting, yeah, probably not at all. And then we do web services in the second C# class, but it's just kind of like, how much of that did you get, right? How much of like SOAP and stuff have you gotten? So that's part of it. The desktop applications, you've probably done like a UI design and stuff like that, a console-based application. You've probably not done a Windows service. My phone's going to keep buzzing and you probably don't want to hear it. There we go. And then there's database questions on this exam. So if you Especially for those of you who are taking both the C# and the SQL exam this round, you're going to get a lot of database questions because there are some basic questions about entity relationships and SQL and connecting various data types like XML and stuff like that. So as you can see, it's a pretty beefy exam in terms of what is actually going to be covered and how this is broken out. So I know that sounds really intimidating, so let me explain a little bit. And again, !doc for access to this Google Doc that I'm working out of. This is this link we were just looking at right here. All right, so how many questions? Microsoft isn't going to tell us how many questions that you're actually going to get because they reserve the right for that to change without notice. And I know that doesn't seem very fair, but there's a reason or a few reasons why. So you're going to get 30 to 50 questions. They're all multiple choice. A passing score is 70. So there's this big kind of explanation down here of what this looks like. Like what do we need to do? So 70% of the items, if you get 50 questions and like you answer 70% of them right, doesn't necessarily mean that you pass the exam. So there's no penalty really for guessing is what Microsoft wants to convey. There's no points deducted for incorrect answers. And the reason that the number of questions is variable is because this is almost like a placement test. The exam is going to continue to give you questions, and if you continue to get them right, you will continue to get more questions until you start to get questions wrong. And then it will kind of place you appropriately in that scale. So some questions on the exam may not count towards the calculation of your score. Some of the exam questions are only there to help Microsoft kind of gather data to help improve the exam or to make the exam more statistically valid. And they don't actually count for or against you. I know that whole thing sounds really sketchy, but in practice, I think it really works in your favor in that you're not just taking, like a standard exam where there's like 100 questions and the passing score is 70 and you start to feel really discouraged when you've gotten like 5 wrong in a row. So you know that if you don't know the answer and you're making kind of an educated guess, that it's not going to necessarily negatively affect you. So that's something to think about. It's 50 minutes for the exam. That is pretty aggressive. If you get all 50 questions, which means you've gotten a fair number of them right, then a question a minute is pretty hard to get through. So the other thing I wanted to show you before we just kind of hop into some sample questions that I've put together for you is this PDF that I have linked in here. And so this is something that kind of gives you a little bit of it's a study guide, kind of gives you a little bit of guidance as to some of those areas that you can study. So as we flip through here, you can see here are those areas that were on that kind of overview. So understanding of core programming, the object-oriented, the general software development, web applications, desktop applications, and databases. So as we go through here, and I thought this diagram here in particular was a good one because if you are thinking about pursuing further professional level certifications, this is kind of how they stack together, or maybe some of the other ones that you might be looking at. So this one in particular is right down here, software development fundamentals. I don't know that you can see my mouse. Exam 98361 at the bottom of the developer track. From there are 2 further exams in the MTA side of things that are slightly more challenging, the Windows Development Fundamentals and the Web Development Fundamentals. And from this link that I give you, you can go dig into all of the different MTA exams that are available. But it kind of shows you what the professional level of those used to look like. Some of you may be familiar with the older format of the MCSD, which is the Microsoft Certified Software Developer, which is now a defunct track for the certification path. So now it's MCTS, and then whatever framework, Windows applications or web applications that you've certified in. And so you can take both if you are that ambitious that you want to complete both exams, but they are going to be kind of specialized and focused. Any of these MTA level exams that you might be interested in at any point, I can proctor for you and probably get you some of these study resources like we're going to look at today. The more professional level ones can be proctored through the testing center. I just don't have the TS level proctor because we don't ever get it and it costs money. So, but digging into this PDF just to show you a little bit of what's in here. So this study guide is particularly helpful because it talks a little bit about the scenarios, and what trips a lot of students up on these exams is they're not just the like standard kind of multiple choice questions that maybe you're used to seeing in your class, or if you take regular like reading quizzes and things like that in your programming classes. These are more based on scenarios. And so in this case, you're given a scenario, and then there's several questions that will relate to the scenario, and you'll need to answer each one. And sometimes they won't be given kind of like 1, 2, 3 like you're seeing here. You'll get the first one, and based on how you answer the first one, it'll give you the second one. Or maybe you got the first one wrong, so it won't even bother to give you the second one. So don't get too hung up on this, like I'm not seeing a bunch of questions in the scenario. Sometimes you just don't. That seems to be something I see a lot. Like students get a little hung up. Hey Yandor, how are you? I know, isn't that great? So students get a little hung up on trying to figure out where they are in the exam, and it's only 50 minutes, so you really don't have a lot of time to be like trying to game it a little bit. So just focus on the questions and really read it. That's the other advice I would give. Some of these questions are worded a little strangely, and I'm going to show you some in the example questions I've pulled out, because if you aren't quite reading them correctly, you're going to choose the wrong answer. And so that's the other trick is just taking your time to really read the question and understand what's being asked. Yan, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really enjoy playing marbles with you at night. But yes, thank you for everyone who's here that didn't know I was a girl. I appreciate that. Cracks me up. So in this doc, it does have some sample questions in here as well, and then the answers are down here. There's only a couple for each section, but it does kind of give you maybe some things to think about, brain refresher kind of things to go over. So each one of these sections is like this. Yes, hearts, thank you. Then you will get code questions, but again, all of this exam is multiple choice. So you're only going to get code questions in the frame of like, read this, and like in this case, like which line is causing a problem, or what is the output of this code, or what line needs to go here. Those kinds of questions. You won't actually write any code, and you won't be asked to produce any code. It's all going to be in the multiple choice format. So, but just kind of be prepared to be able to read the code as you see it and then answer the questions about it. So that's another thing that you'll see. And so I want to make sure that you take the time to go through these, kind of check the answers. If you read the answer and you're like, I don't understand that, like send me or one of the faculty just an email and be like, why is this A? I don't understand. So because that's really the important part. You're not going to understand how to answer the questions correctly on the test if you really don't get like why that's the answer. So this is this PDF here. It said !doc if you don't already have it, so that you can go over that study exam. Again, this has got some information about the types of questions, kind of how the exam's going to go. So let's look at some of the sample questions. I put together 20. These are really, every year they change the exam just a little bit. Again, some of the questions that are given on the test are really just to refine the test. And so I try to pull out a few that are maybe a good indication of the kinds of questions you're going to see, under no circumstances am I guaranteeing you'll see any of these 20, because they may have changed it since then, or they're rewording them, or you're just going to get a completely different set of questions. But the whole point is that you're getting questions that fall into these 6 domains. And again, it's 15 to 20% of the exam broken up, except you can see that the object-oriented programming section is weighted a little heavier, so that you will end up getting a few more questions in that area than the other. Some of them are pretty straightforward questions, like this one. You decide to develop an algorithm that lists all necessary steps to perform an operation in the correct order. Any technique you use should minimize complexity and ambiguity. Which of the following should you use? Now, one of the things that this exam will kind of trick you on is sometimes these questions sound like it's like choose all that apply. And unless the question specifically comes out and says choose all that apply, you are only to select one answer, and you need to try to pick the best answer. And I know sometimes you're looking at these answers and you're like, but it's both A and B, or I feel that both of them are correct. Try to pick the one that is more correct. And I know that's probably the worst thing you want to hear. So in this case, hopefully we all agree that the answer is B, that a flowchart would be the technique that you should use based on the question and the way that it's worded. So yeah, flowchart over a decision table. If you don't know what a decision table is, you could go look those up. A paragraph in English probably wouldn't cut it. And then of course, if we're trying to understand the solution before writing a program, then writing a C# program is not going to be the right answer. They won't always be so obvious in that you can kind of, do that educated guess and whittle a couple of them out. This is a little bit of a softball question to get us started. You will get questions like this one, which I always chuckle when I see a question on the exam that I feel is slightly subjective. But in this case, it's not a trick question. So which of the following is not considered a high-level programming language? If you've maybe never heard of some of these programming languages before, or you're not sure what the concept or definition of high-level programming language is, then you'll want to make sure to acquaint yourself with those kinds of things, because we do get these questions. But in this case, C++, C#, and Visual Basic are all considered high-level programming languages. If you didn't know that the Common Intermediate Language is in fact a language and not something someone made up, you'll want to go look up what that means. But it is not a high-level programming language in that it meets the definition. And so A would be the right answer here. And at any time, if you have questions in the chat, please put them in there, because I would rather answer them now than they stew around in your brain for a while and then you send it to me at like 3 a.m. But if that's you, send it to me at 3 a.m. I'll see it in the morning. It's fine. So here's an example of maybe like a coding kind of question that you'll see. So you're writing this business application. You've written the following statement to declare an array, and now you need to access the second item in the array, and they clarify that this would be the number 2. And so which of these would be the correct expression? And so they will show them to you out of order like this, which I think is weird and frustrating. So like in this case where they've mixed the indice numbers up, that's pretty common. So if you're not familiar with arrays, I would recommend that you go back and review that this would be position 0 and then this would be position 1, because in C# we always use 0-based indices for arrays. So the correct answer here would be C. But this is a good example of the kind of where you just get like a little bit of code or something and you have to answer a question about the code. Likewise, this one here. So we have to look at the statements, and then it says what will be the variable z after all of the above statements are executed. And again, the answers are out of order, which I know is frustrating. At least it bothers me. Maybe it doesn't bother everybody else. So the one thing I want to point out is there's small syntax errors in the code sometimes. In this case, there should be semicolons here and here, right? End of line statements. You have to ignore that stuff, especially if a given answer isn't like, you know, this is a broken statement or this would cause an error or something like that. Any small syntax errors, like missing a line ending in which the answer, you're right, there isn't a Z in this one at all. You kind of have to extrapolate just a little bit. Yeah. So in this case, when I pulled this one out of the exam, it's written exactly as given. And so using some basic deduction, we have to probably assume that they mean X and not Z, given that they're modifying X. And we can look at the answers and kind of determine like what would be the correct answer. But you do get questions that have like typos and stuff in them. And I know that's not fair. Now you can flag them while you're taking the exam. If you flag a question, then it's kind of sent on for some QA. I don't have anything to do with that process. It goes to Microsoft and someone takes care of it, I hope. But this is a good example of like a weird question. Now, at the time of the exam, when the way this question is written, A is the correct answer. Because X is 10, and then we're doing the prefix increment and into Y, and then X equals Y plus plus, which makes it 11. Because the question is worded incorrectly. Small typo. So don't freak out when you see little stuff like this. If I'm your proctor and you call me over and you're like, the question is broken, I'm going to tell you to flag it. There's nothing I can do about it. I get zero control over any of that. So that's the best we can do with those kinds of questions. But I love this example because it is all kinds of weird. So any questions about that? I know that doesn't seem fair, but I guess it's hard to be perfect in a coding exam. I don't know who writes these exams for Microsoft. I don't think it's Certiport or Pearson or any of the big ones. I don't know who writes these. All right, so a sample question, getting into that object-oriented section. Here's an example of what you might see. The prefix increment. So the difference between the prefix and the postfix is when that +1 will be applied. So the +1 isn't applied until the element that we're adding it to is evaluated. So we never evaluate X. X is never used in any context outside of this prefix, which means that +1 hasn't been assigned yet. So we would need to like use X in a loop, or we would need to assign it to another variable like we did with Y. We would need to print it. We would need to look at X in some format before this +1 would be applied. And that's why it's 10 and it's still 10, and we put it into Y and Y is 10 and Y gets +1 here, and that's why it's 11. Does that make sense? We don't see the prefix a lot because I think a lot of people don't appreciate how the prefix works. I don't want to say they don't understand it, because I'm sure plenty of people understand it. They just don't see an application for it where the postfix is far more common, because +1 makes sense, like in almost all cases. So yeah, good question. All right, so in this case, writing a method that doesn't return a value to the calling code. Which keyword would we use? Void string private int. Hopefully this is an easy question, and we all know that void methods don't return anything. And so A is the right answer here. I have a polling thing. Maybe we should make this more of a multiple choice quiz. Again, another one I think is pretty easy. if we need to provide complex multi-way branching in our C# program to make sure that our code is easy to read and understand. Again, sometimes we just get like nice fluffy statements in here. Like, you need to make sure your code is easy to read and understand. I'm sure that, like, you could put that in every question, right? So just don't let stuff like that trip you up too much. But we know if we're doing multi-way branching, it's the switch statement. Now don't get that confused with the case. Remember, we use case inside of a switch. So this is a little bit of a trick question in that if you're not thinking, you might choose case accidentally, thinking, well, I use cases inside of a switch to make the multi-way branches, but it is in fact the switch statement that we would use because case by itself is not a statement. And we want the C# statement. So being very precise with our language is important. Having some weirdness with my mouse today. So this one, we're writing a program. It iterates through a collection such as arrays or lists. We need to make sure we process each item in the collection once. Again, we need to make sure the code is easy to read and debug. Oh, isn't that what we always want? So which of the following statements provides the best solution for the requirement? Okay, the best solution, because it's not a choose all that apply. And we could probably make the argument that all of these can do the job, right? If we need to iterate through an item in a collection once, we can write a for statement, we can write a do while, we can write a while, we can write a for each. But in this case, for each is the only correct answer because it is the best solution for iterating through an array or list and processing each item in the collection once. So don't get in your own head too much and sit there and go, but all of these are right. You're correct in the programming sense that we can write an appropriate statement with all four of these looping structures, but we want the best solution. Dang Microsoft. Okay, so here's another example of the type of coding question that you might get, where they've given us line numbered code, and then based on some kind of condition, we have to determine how we need to change the code. So it needs to perform 5 iterations. We can see that we have a counter, it starts at 0, while that counter is less than or equal to 5. And inside the block, we're writing out the value of count and then whatever the current value is, and then we're incrementing that counter. It says when you run the program, you notice the loop does not iterate 5 times. What should you do to make sure the loop is executed exactly 5 times? So this might be a good time for a poll. Can you see it? Let's get some votes. What do we got to change? I'm curious. Come on. Don't make me tell you the right answer. You can read it. I believe in you. Should we change the while statement to count equals 5? Or should it be count greater than or equal to 5? Maybe it's the increment step. On line 5, we should be using the prefix plus plus instead of the postfix. Or is it the fact that our counter should be initialized to 1 and not 0? No, you did great. Yeah, you just typed the number in chat. I've never used Twitch. So it's 50-50. Come on. We gotta have more votes than that. You gotta put yourself in the right brain space. What would Microsoft want me to say? It seems to be the almost the correct answer to these questions all the time. What would Microsoft want us to say? Now it's a 3-way tie. You've made it worse. 10 viewers and 3 voters. How does that work? No one's brave. The answer box covers the answers. I can probably fix that a little bit. I can make it cover the chat. Would that help? I can make it smaller. Let's move stuff around in the layout while we're streaming. That's always a good time. That means I'm going to break things usually. Is that better? Can you see them now? Anger the gods of the OBS and all hell will break loose, I'm sure. All right, we at least have a majority, so I'm going to take it. All right, in this case, the correct answer that Microsoft wants you to put is D. So, changing the counter from starting at 0 to starting at 1 is the best answer. Remember, we're always going for the most appropriate or best answer. I like the poll thing. I like to see what you guys come up with. Oh, I love this question. I don't know. This was the question that actually we get like this end of the year summary email, and this was the question that Microsoft said people had the worst like trouble with, and it was like the question that that like it was like got the most wrong answers or something. I'd have to go read the email. All right, so basic order of operations, right, guys? I feel like when I used to teach 120 or CS1 or whatever you want to call it, I spent a lot of time teaching basic order of operations to students who didn't understand how to evaluate a statement like this. So I think it's time for another poll. I really want to see what you guys think. So is it 13, 20, 19, or 14? I love it when these things, like, they get posted to Facebook, right? And it just shows all your friends and your family who is maybe not numbers, dude man gamer, please. 1 for A, 2 for B, 3 for C, 4 for D. Hi, Rainbow. Thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. Well, at least we have a clear majority on this one. That the correct answer, God help you, should be A. I was really worried that you all were going to put something else, and then I was going to have to teach a math lesson tonight because I really wasn't down for that. But yeah, it's 13. I don't even want to walk through why that's the correct answer. I just hope we all understand that's why. But you do get these questions, so understanding, basic mathematical order of operations is nice. That's good. I assume that's when everyone says you don't really need to know a lot of math, to be a successful programmer. I think maybe you need to know a little math to be like basic order of operations. All right, stuff about data types. If you need to go back and review basic requirements of .NET data types, this is a good example of a question that you might see. So you need to manipulate very large integer values that might exceed 12 digits. The values can be positive or negative, so which data type would be the most appropriate? So if you need to go back and review these, I know that there's some good resources just in Microsoft's website in the the .NET resources and documentation on which data types are appropriate and what they can and can't hold and the constraints. In this case, the answer is D. This would be a long value. So, if you didn't know. All right, a really long question. you get these questions about databases, you get these questions about like SQL connection objects and connection strings and stuff like that. They're always kind of long, but usually the point is something like this question here. It really has nothing to do with SQL in and of itself. It has to do with appropriate software design. So in this case, we have a method. It opens a database connection using the SQL Connect object. We don't really care that it's a SQL Connect object. That's just kind of a little misdirect. The method retrieves some information from the database and then closes the connection. We need to make sure that the code fails gracefully if there's a database error. So in this situation, we have to wrap the database code in a try, catch, finally block. Yeah, it's an insanely irrelevant question for an actual question. And it's almost like setting up that scenario for you so that you can, and this is a good one where sometimes you'll get the 2 or 3 follow-up questions that are all based on the scenario. You use 2 catch blocks, one to catch exceptions of type SQL exception, the second to catch the more generic base class of exception. So the question is, which of the following places should be the best choice for the closing of the SQL connection object? And so again, the question itself really has nothing to do with SQL or the use of the SQL connection object. It's about try-catch blocks and good code design. So we probably wouldn't want to close inside of the try block before the first catch block, because if there's an exception in the catch block, then we're going to close the connection regardless, and that's not good. We probably don't want to just put it in the catch block that catches the SQL exception objects, because if there's a more generic exception caught in the other catch block, then we're not going to close the connection. C is also the wrong answer for the same reason that B is the wrong answer. D is the correct answer. And so if you don't know what the finally block does, the finally block executes whether the try is successfully finished or not. So if we ended up in this catch block here, or this catch block here, or not, and the try just, all the code in the try executed successfully, then we're going to hit the finally block regardless. And so that is the best place for closing out a SQL connection object. I know, you get these long questions that you get real nervous about because you feel like you've got a lot of ground to cover and not enough time to do it. And you're trying to make sense of all of this information, and a lot of this information really isn't relevant to what ultimately is the goal of the question. So if you're confronted with a very large paragraph of stuff like this, it may be to your advantage to actually come down here and read, like, what is the point? So you can put the rest of this in context. Because they will try to, like, it's not like they're trying to set you up. It's not a trick. But they're trying to frame a scenario so that you can give the best answer possible. I'm sure that given the opportunity, we could reword this question in a better way, but it does ultimately serve the purpose. So I like this one. Here's another code one. Oh, I like this one because it doesn't really give you the question. I remember when I copied this one out, I was like, you could tell someone just like forgot the end of the sentence, like the last part of it. You write the following code, and then you're just presented with solutions. What we ultimately determined from what the correct answer to this question is, and I hope that you don't see this, but you do, again, sometimes get these coding questions where you kind of have to figure out what they were trying to ask you. And so, in this case, the question should be, how many iterations of the loop do you get? Because there's no print statement. And you're not really evaluating anything. So in this case, when you get these kinds of questions where it's like there was no question, you may have to try to guess. And again, I hope that this is part of the reason why guesses don't count against you. So the correct answer to this question was B, 4. To whatever question they were trying to ask and didn't actually get to ask. It's so terrible. I know. That's you hope somewhere there's some poor guy who gets to read all of those like flag question things at the end of tests, and he runs into this and he's just like, just ruined his day. All right. So this is what I ultimately think the previous question was trying to ask. But I like this question because it's an example of how we have to pay attention to what we're being asked. So it says we write the following code. We have this nice do while loop with a print line in here. There is a little logical break in here to pay attention to. How many times will the control enter the while loop? All right, so at first glance, I is equal to 6. We know it's a do while loop, so we're going to get at least the first time through before this statement is evaluated, in which case it's going to be false because I is not less than or equal to 5 at any point in time. So, yeah. So you might be tempted to say 0 because you're like, well, this is false, and so the whole loop never executes. But we have to remember with a do while loop that we get at least 1. So in this case, the correct answer is C. We get 1. And then this loop never executes again. So you have to pay attention to what they're asking you. And again, the answers won't be in order, so don't screw yourself up there. And then not only do you get questions like this that actually like test your knowledge on particular types, but you get questions like this where it asks you like, what is the appropriate structure? So we need to select an appropriate repetition structure for our requirement. We need to make sure the test for the termination is performed at the bottom of the loop rather than at the top. And so the do while statement, of course, is the correct repetition structure based on our requirements. You know, I don't do these to be discouraging. I do them to be honest because I want you to be prepared. And being prepared means that you have the appropriate knowledge to going into the exam with what you need to know. Not just what are you going to be presented with on the exam as far as like these domains and what do you need to study, but helping you kind of be prepared for some of the things that you'll see. And this just comes from the years of our experience giving these exams and kind of knowing the weird stuff that you'll see sometimes to help you not only have the material preparation, but that kind of mental preparation for what you're going to see. Because right, I'm the proctor. I don't take it. Actually, I do take it. I retake it every year just because I want to see kind of what they're doing and the changes to the questions, and then sometimes I get to pull out a special one to add it to my deck here of fun and interesting kind of examples. But certification tests are stressful, right? We come into the exam already in that kind of high alert state of mind where we may not be presenting ourselves you know, in the best way. We're tired, it's finals week, and yeah, right. I take all of them every year. I usually do it in May, and I just kind of shotgun through all of them. It's great. So the majority of the students who are going to be taking this exam are somewhere in year 2 or 3 of a computer science program. And so these particular exams, these MTA Microsoft Technology Associate exams. Oh, there was that lovely, I want that diagram back. Are specifically designed for students as opposed to trying to take, where was that diagram? The more professional level ones that have, so any of these MTA ones, I think it actually says, who should take this exam? Recommended candidates be familiar with these concepts, taking training courses, working with tutorials and samples available, expected to have some experience. Right, I think they probably even recommend their own training courses or something somewhere, because you can actually take the Microsoft training courses for these. But this whole block of associate level stuff down here didn't used to exist. It was just like you had these professional level certifications, and if you were a student trying to take a professional level Microsoft certification, you were going to shell out hundreds of dollars, because I think those exams still start somewhere around $250, and you almost always had to buy the extra $100 second chance exam because you were most likely not going to pass it the first time. And so for the low price of like $100 at the time that you bought the original exam voucher, you could buy a second chance to sit the exam like within 60 days or something like that. And they're hard. Even now, you know, perfectly good developers who do this for a living and would study and prepare for these TS level exams still fail them on the first try. Yeah, helpful for entry-level jobs, helps differentiate you kind of from that entry-level pack of, hey, everyone's got an associate's or bachelor's degree, and yeah, that mid to senior level. I think the last time I looked at the professional level ones, they said a minimum of 3 years of industry experience. I'd have to go look at these TS ones to see if that's changed at all. Yeah. This one is missing a table. Where did the table go? Hold on. I have it. There we go. That, oh, hey, thanks. That fixes that question. Because I was like, where did the table go? Yep, we're going to do the database one next. We're going to do the SQL exam after this. I've got the same kinds of resources and information about the SQL exam too. Thank you. Cranigan, am I saying that right? I appreciate that. All right, question 15. We're writing a program that needs to select an appropriate repetition structure for our requirement. We need to make sure that the test for the termination condition is performed. Oh wait, this is a, did I put the table in the wrong spot? Or the question got repeated in my document. That's what happened. I was like, the table is missing. Oh dear, I've copied this question wrong. All right, we're gonna skip 15. I'm gonna have to fix 15. This one's missing the thing too. When I move these over to Google Drive, I think some of my images got screwed up. Here we go. This has a flowchart in it, which is really hard to read because I basically had to like pull it out of the exam program, and it didn't like that at all. All right, we're gonna skip 15 because I broke 15 and I accidentally copied 14 twice. You've been cheated of one question. Please complain to the management. All right, here we go. So in this particular question, we're given a flow chart to read. There are not a lot of these kinds of questions. This one's a little bit of an outlier in that I've not seen another one since, but I saw this one in May, so you might see something similar. We need to perform some calculations on a number. We develop the following flow chart for the calculation. If the input value of n is 5, what is the output value of the variable fact according to this flowchart? I know that's probably a little hard to read, but hopefully you get it out of the doc and you can zoom in or make it bigger or something like that. But our choices are 6, 24, 720, or 120. And we can kind of dig through here and see that we start with input in. So we're going to get n is 5. Fact is 1. We have a logical check of n greater than 1. If that's true, then they're going to take fact and multiply it by n and put it into fact. And then n equals n minus 1 until the loop is no longer valid. And then we output fact. So, yeah, 120. D is the correct answer. So just being able to check that you can kind of logically walk through this flowchart and get the correct answer. Again, I hadn't ever seen like this kind of question until just this May. So I thought that was an interesting... No, you're fine. I like it when people answer the questions rather than like... It even happens in person, right? I'm teaching the class and I just stand there. At least at that point, I just stand there and stare at everyone. The stare of shame. All right, we only have a couple more because I only set up 20 in this document. This is another example of the choose the best answer. But this is a little different question than the one we were presented with earlier, because this one says we need to make sure that the code is easy to understand and maintain, even when the loop body contains complex code, and that we're iterating a fixed number of times. So in this case, they've thrown us a little bit of a they've thrown us a bit of a loop. Oh, puns. Where the last time we said for each was the right answer, in this case, 4 is the right answer for this question. And I know that's a little weird. You know, we talked about the best structure for iterating like an array or a collection a fixed number of times. We had pretty much the exact same set of answers, and it told us that for each was the right answer. But in this case, that whole this caveat of even when the loop body contains complex code changes us into a for loop situation instead of a for each. So just kind of watch that. I have never ever had a student tell me they got like 2 of the same question. So if you do feel like I saw this question already, the wording is probably slightly different in a way to provoke a different answer. So just be really careful about that. You are able to navigate around inside the exam and go back to previous questions up until you submit. So you can always move around. Yeah, that's the other part of this. That it's not telling us it's an array or a collection that we're looping through. It just says that we need to iterate a fixed number of times. So that's maybe the other little clue in there, that they're not talking about a for each loop. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, an object-oriented design question. If we're not well up on all of the different kind of keywords and things that fall under this section, you might want to go back over some of the, you know, like book chapters or notes or things that you might have. So some extraneous information about what this method does and what it's named. We don't particularly care. I think there's a wasp in here. Look at that. Is that a wasp? It's a wasp in my apartment. Like suddenly DEFCON 3 or 2 or something in here. How is there a wasp in here? It's like 30 degrees outside. He looks like he's in distress. He just went behind the television. I know, panic mode. Save me from the wasp. All right. If suddenly I dive under a desk, it's because I'm under attack. That is totally a wasp. I don't even know how he's alive. Okay, the only thing we care about in question 18 is this part here. We need to make sure that percent value, which we see here as a variable of type double, is accessible only within the calculate discount method. So does that mean the modifier should be public, internal, private, or protected? And again, if we're not well up on the siren music from Kill Bill, yeah, that's exactly what it sounded like in my head. I was just like, as he went flying by, he's like caught in the jet stream of the heating system. Yeah. Oh, is it buffering? Doesn't tell me I'm having an issue with frames or anything. I don't. You know, my kid's not even here using the internet because usually that's when I have trouble with frames. But he has a job, so I don't know. You can try refreshing it or changing your quality options, Jay. That might help. But I don't think it's me because mine stuff says it's doing really good. Yeah. I know Twitch has just been lately. All right, so if we have a variable inside of a method that needs to only be accessible within that method, then we make it private. Yep, private. So again, if we're not really up on, you know, what's the difference between public, private, and protected, then you'll want to make sure and kind of go over the differences there. Same thing that I've got on question 19, some of these object-oriented keywords like abstract and sealed. You're going to get questions on these, like these OO design type questions to make sure that you understand what these keywords mean. So we defined a class scenario that defines functionality. We don't really care. You don't want the functionality of this class to be inherited into derived classes. So what keyword would we use to define the scenario class to make sure that it could not be inherited? And that is a sealed class. You know, we don't see sealed classes a lot in .NET until we get into like higher level design. Oh, I know I could put the poll up. Here, we'll do the poll for the last one because the last one's, I think, a hard question. So we have a class named GeoShape. There's a method inside of GeoShaped named area. The method calculates the area of a shape because we care. We want the derived classes of GeoShape, I should say class, that's great that it's plural, to supersede the functionality to support the area calculation of additional geometric shapes. So you had known, but you guessed. So when the method area is invoked on a GeoShape object, the area should be calculated based on the runtime type of the GeoShape object. So which keyword should we use with the definition of the area method inside of the GeoShape class in order to make sure that we can override the functionality based on what we want? And I know that's a tricky one. Abstract, override, new, and virtual. They're ones that are easy for us to mix up in our brain. So if we need to go back and review the keywords. Wait, hang on. Yeah, we need to think about it for a minute. Because we're talking about the method, not the class. What is the keyword we would put on the area method inside of the class of GeoShape? Now, it doesn't tell us anything about the modifiers on the class, which means there may not be any. I get streamers that activate my echo all the time. And then I'm always like, shut up. And yelling at it from across the room. All right, I'm going to finish the poll, but I'm going to tell you it's not abstract. It is virtual. It is D. It's virtual. So I could probably teach a whole lesson on the difference between these 4 keywords. You can go look them up in the documentation, the difference between abstract and virtual, what overrides does versus what new does. But these are kind of key design concepts of our .NET classes. And if we haven't done a lot of kind of multi-class work where we're deliberately trying to do things like what this scenario describes, then you may never have used these keywords and you only read about them. And in that case, it probably isn't in there. So I would strongly recommend some review on these particular keywords. Is virtual C# specific? I don't know that I can answer that question because I don't do any .NET development outside of C#. What was the question? Is virtual C# specific? The 10-year experienced software developer back here says he doesn't know, but then again, he doesn't write in .NET, so. He's a VB6 developer. We don't ask him .NET questions.
And C#. Come on now.
Did you kill the wasp? Should I be on guard?
I can't find it.
Oh God, the wasp is lost in the apartment. Send help. Oh. Okay. So you have this doc, which people have been activating in the chat with !doc, D-O-C. You can make a copy of it. It's got those links here at the top that take you to these resources I was showing you and kind of explains the overview of the exam. Feel free to make a copy of it. Use that. In that PDF also had some questions and answers in each section in here to kind of help you in each of the particular domains. Other questions about the C# exam before I move on to the SQL stuff. Again, I don't tell you this to be discouraging. I want you to be as prepared as I can make you because I know how nerve-wracking it is. And I know in many cases, including the students who are in my advanced C# class, not only is this a certification exam, which looks awesome on a resume and employers love, but it's also your final. And I know how nerve-wracking that all could be, and you're stressed and you're tired and you haven't slept in days. I know, I see you. Everybody looks worn out. This time of year is rough. The test, these questions came off the test, so in that regard, yes, it is similar. But the questions you will see may not look anything like these sample questions. Again, everything's broken out into these domains, based on these percentages that you're given. So, the questions could be anything pertaining to any of these topics that are given. It's, I'm not going to say it's an easy test. I think our pass rate continues to stay somewhere around high 70s, somewhere around 77, 78% of all students who attempt pass this exam. Some of them pass with a 70, which is passing. I see very, very few perfects. The questions in the Google Doc, now the ones that you see in here are probably a little easier than the ones that are in my Google Doc, because the ones in the Google Doc I've also pulled out for a specific reason to maybe talk about why or what is going on with this particular question, like the ones with the typos or the choose the best answer kind of questions. So I hope that it's not a lot of these kind of meaty, difficult questions for you. But this is kind of my collection of strange questions that I've accumulated over time to help prove some points. And it really shouldn't be. Like I said, this is an exam that is specifically targeted to learners and students. So it doesn't require that you've had, hours of hands-on experience and that you have a lot of real-world application to fall back on.